Great. And first off, to introduce myself, I am Christine Watts. I'm head of product and client success here at 90. And this is the 90 advanced training webinar. So I'm going to be going through things with kind of the understanding that you guys understand the basics. And what we're going to be talking about today is really setting up multiple teams and getting, multiple departments involved in the EOS process and therefore in 90. So we'll talk through that and permissions. We'll go through customizing your meeting agendas for those specific departments and talking about some of the other meeting types other than the level 10, like the quarterly and the annual agenda. And then we'll also dive into a fair amount of feedback. So feedback is that quarterly conversation and annual review area of the software. So talking about how people are getting their team members involved there, and then also looking at our process documentation. So if there's any other things we want to cover, I am great with that. Again, use that Q&A area. We can talk about scorecard setup. We can talk about user preferences. You guys just kind of let me know where you want to go as I'm going through these, but that's the general idea. And then we've got an hour to kind of go along and figure it out along the way. So to jump in the left-hand nav here, getting multiple teams set up in your account really first starts in the very bottom settings area. So in settings, the first thing you come to is this Teams tab, and that's going to be where you're creating more than just your leadership team. So this is what you start off with just by default. As you create new teams, really all you need is a name. So let's say we have an Ops 2 team, we can go ahead and add that to our list. And then once it's on here, I left that add myself to the team all still checked off. So I'm going to be a member of that team by default. You don't have to do that. Once you've done that, choose what other team members you want to add. If you use this button, it's just a list of all the people that are on your directory, but adding the team also makes it so it's going to show up on that directory page. So if you prefer to go through your user list and pick people to add that way, you absolutely can. Something to remember is only people with the manager role or above will be able to create new teams. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for the settings page or trying to set that up and you don't see it, it means they need to bump your role up, and increasing your role is done on the directory. So this is essentially just a list of all of the people in our account. And once we have that list, it's going to show you what teams people are on and then also what role they have in the system. So if you need your role increased, this is where they would come find your name and then go ahead and make sure it's a manager or above so that you can create additional teams and invite people to those teams. The owner admin role really has access to see and do everything in the account. So even though Daniel is only on the finance team, he still has access to all of the other ones because he is that owner or even an admin role. Once you get down to manager, managee, and observer, they can only see the specific team they're on. The manager just has a bit more permission around. I can create a new team and invite people to that. I can invite people to the teams I'm on. So you have a little bit more edit access there. Once you get to a managee, they can have full edit access to their team's content, but they can't invite people to the system. They can't edit the VTO and the accountability chart. And then observer, one more level below that, they actually have view only access of the whole account. So view only access of the team they're on. Can't make edit changes. You can't assign them any content. So they're actually a free user as well. Another thing to mention about individual user permissions is we do have this implementer role. So if you have an implementer, business coach, anything like that, that you want to give full edit access to, they can't get assigned content, but they do have the ability to see all of your teams, edit access settings, run meetings, do whatever you would need them to do with that implementer role, and they're free in your account. So that's our users area. If you do need to invite users, it's done through this add person up here at the top. You can either just add them to your list so that they can go on the accountability chart. That's free, or you can activate them as a new user. And so that is going to make it so that you're actually inviting them, getting them on Teams, giving them a role. You can choose whether you want to send them the email invite right away or not. Sometimes when people are building out a team, they choose to not send that so that they can do the full team setup and then just go through and send everybody's email at the same time. So you can decide whether you want to toggle that on or off. And if you leave it off, it will give you the option to send that invite just on your list here. You can see, yeah, here's a great example of that, of re-inviting somebody. So let's go back to settings and talk a little bit more about our team setup. Now that we know how to create a team and then putting users on the team, making sure that they're invited, and we can either put them on the team from the directory page or directly on here when we click on this add team member option. Next thing to look at is actually a couple options we have right here, making the team a project or private. Making the team and checking it off as having a project here is going to mean that that team does not have a VTO. So it's typically used for anything that's cross-departmental. They're not like their own given department, so they don't have a VTO need necessarily. So you can decide whether to check or uncheck that. And then making a team private, I'll hover over that so you guys can see it while I'm talking about it, is going to mean that it's hidden from anybody that's not on that team. So even an owner or an admin role, as they're using their account on their day-to-day basis, they're not going to see it in their teams drop down as they're going between rocks and to-dos and looking at different teams' content, unless they're specifically on that team. So it's great for same page meetings for that reason. It gives a little bit extra layer of privacy, and then only owners are going to be the ones that can actually come in here and check or uncheck this or add people to the team, add themselves, unless you're on it and have those edit permissions. So even an admin can't edit those. So I suggest using private, same page meetings, one-on-ones, anything that you want that a little bit extra layer of privacy around, even for that admin role. Great, and we've got a question come in. So if I've created a new company, but adding people to that are already a part of 90, it seems they already have access, but don't need to be invited. That's exactly right. So if you have an account and you've invited your people to that account, and then you want to create a second one, you can. So you can easily, if you don't want to create a team and you have a whole separate company that you want to create, you can come into this My Account page and you can create a brand new company from here. This will actually take you to a create company page. And so you'll create a secondary account. And what that does is it adds it to this drop down up here. So here's all the different companies that I'm a part of. And if you're adding people to this secondary company that already have 90 logins, you're essentially gonna put them in just like you normally would, come to the directory, add them as a user, but they're not going to get a secondary email. It's just next time they log in, they're going to have it in their drop down option. So they automatically get added. So when that happens, you might find you already see their profile image or content in their personal information here. And that's just because it's automatically tying in their existing login. So all they have to do is log into their account like normal and it's already set up. So if you guys are doing that and inviting existing users, use their same email because then it makes it really easy for them. Let me know if that answered your question. And that was a great point to kind of differentiate between another team in your account or just creating a brand new account as a whole. A lot of times people don't create a brand new account unless you really have, it is a separate company. Maybe it's this separate peer group that you want to use 90 with or something really outside of your organization, because the two accounts will be completely separate. So separate users, separate billing, separate everything. And right now we don't have a way to merge data or send information back and forth between two companies. Great, so looks like I answered that question. Feel free to keep them coming in as we're going through. That was great. Teams, I think I covered everything here. Let me know if you have questions. Let's go to configuration. This is going to be some specific settings around each of you, or really for the company as a whole. So deciding if you want some of the settings on the scorecard, rocks, a lot of those are accessible on the individual pages. So if you go to data or rocks, it will have these toggles on here and a settings button on that page. A couple things to add are the accountability chart does have a hide option. So if you would like to make it private from any non-leadership team members, so this is not taking into account people's role, it's taking into account if they're on the leadership team or not. You can turn that on, and it's great if you guys are like in a quarterly and playing around with a different layout or doing any sort of work where you'd rather keep it private until you're ready to share that with everybody. So toggling that on or off just hides that icon from non-leadership members. And then we also have the bar here. And I'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the feedback area. But this is so you can know based on people's quarterly conversation and annual review responses, who is above and below that bar based on their manager's responses. All right, and so getting back to teams and setup here, let's talk through a couple of the individual aspects of the data and the rocks pages, especially because when you have multiple teams in your account, it does open up a couple extra things for you to come in and use. The first of those being on this data page, you can have measurables that are on multiple teams. So instead of just creating a new one, you could add an existing measurable. Let's use this one as an example. So I'll copy this title so I can just paste it in. And then let's go into the same page meeting. So if I wanted to pull that same measurable into the same page meeting, I can click add existing measurable. And this is going to be a list of all of the measurables I've created in my account. And I can easily filter for that one specifically. If I wanted new client referrals, let's say. Let's let this load. So we got new client referrals, pending clients. We'll check that off, we'll save it, and it gets added to this list with the same numbers, same content, same information, and it lets you transition information really easily. So when you enter a number in one spot, it cascades it over. So if I update that to 290, for example, when I go back to my leadership team, it'll give me 290 in that spot. So really easy way to have one team enter content and then it either flow up or flow down from the leadership team. And that goes for weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual on there. So just use that add existing measurable option when you want to have things in different places. And then with the rocks page, very similar. You can have one rock on multiple teams. So when you come into here, leadership team, let's say that's where the rock, its primary team where it's going to live. If Michael is on other teams, he has this add to other teams option and he can select the other teams that he's a part of. This can be any ones that you're a member of. And then when you go, just like with measurables, go to those other teams, you have the same information, you can update it from any spot and you're not duplicating and having to re-enter any sort of data in here. When we get into to-dos and issues, these are all single team items. So when I open this up, you can see there is only one option here. So we don't have the add to other teams for to-dos or issues within there. Let me know if you guys have questions about that. Next up, let's go ahead and check out the meetings page. And what I want to cover here is looking at customizing meeting agendas, and then we can take a look at the quarterly and annual sessions as well, since I think most of you would probably already be familiar with the level 10 meeting itself. Let me know if you're not, and I'm happy to walk through that as well. But as far as customizing the agenda goes, your icon up in the top right here, and this opens it up so that you're choosing what team do I want to customize and what meeting type. So it's defaulting to level 10 meeting and leadership team because that's the page I'm on. I can easily switch it. Let's say I wanted to update marketing, and you can do a lot of different things. You can rearrange these sections. Maybe IDS is only supposed to be 30 minutes for this team. Maybe I want to hide one of these sections because we don't need it here. So you can kind of rearrange and reorganize as needed. And then your last option is adding a brand new section. So when I click add section, I might want to name this something. And then your two options are, do you want to pull in a separate web page? So it just has to be an iframe friendly link. So it gives you a couple specifications around the type of URL you can pull in. Let's say I just wanted to put 90.io. You can do check URL and it'll give you a little preview. So that's just a helpful, make sure it does work to pull in the address. So that's option number one, if you wanted to pull in a separate web page with your custom section, or instead, if you wanted to just type out meeting details. So maybe you just have a list of questions, a list of bullet points that you want to go through week to week. This is just that normal rich text editor where you can put that detail within to here just as a talking point during the meeting. So that's your custom section. I'll give you a couple use cases for this. I would say on departmental meetings, a lot of people end up moving IDS to 30 minutes. So that's an extremely common one. Other common use cases are going to be in a departmental meeting like a sales or marketing or anything like that. Maybe you guys want to go to a HubSpot or Salesforce or any sort of like CRM. So maybe instead of headlines, you guys go through new clients one or client questions, or same thing with maybe a development team you wanted to pull up, the tickets resolved in last week or new issues created. So you guys can kind of play around with whatever's best for you as far as what you guys want to review in that departmental level 10. Another common use case for this is going to be the same page meeting. So when people run same page meetings, they usually create a team for same page meeting. Maybe it's not just same page. Maybe you guys do a lot of one-on-ones in your companies, so you can create, a Bob and Jill team, and have it just be those two people's names, put them on the team. And then a lot of times people will hide these sections within the meeting and just use a check-in area, just use a build issues list and IDS for that same page. Depending on if it is between that visionary and integrator, they'll either make it 90 minutes, maybe it's just a weekly check-in between two people, so maybe it just needs to be 30. But that's a lot of times what happens is team is created and then you can come in and hide the 4 sections that you don't really need for the same page option. When you're done, save it to make sure that the next meeting you start has that agenda, or you can reset it to the EOS default, which is essentially just going to take you back to, I'll go to my leadership team, but it'll take you back to this every time. So that's the default agenda items, it's the default time frames, and make sure everything's turned on. So feel free to play around with that. That's your level 10. When we get into the quarterly type and the annual session, these two are also adjustable. It's just your different meeting format. So there's just a different reset to EOS default for each of these meeting types. And the annual session even has this 2-day aspect. So you do have the day 1 and the day 2 agenda that you can walk through and customize within here. Let's actually reset this to the default. And that way, when we start the meeting, it'll be what is default in your account. So let's go through examples of the quarterly and the annual session. With the quarterly, when we start the meeting, it works just like your level 10 would. Objectives and check-in are just guiding you guys around what that team discussion is going to look like. And then when we jump into review prior quarter, it does pop up with a couple suggestions as far as, if the ROC's incomplete, make sure you move it to the long-term issues list. It'll give you a couple things beyond that as far as checking your completion rate and making sure that you archive all your ROCs. So those are the main actions that you're doing on this page during the meeting. End goal is reviewing how you guys did, making sure you're capturing anything on the long-term issues list that wasn't done this quarter, and then making sure you clear off your ROCs list so that when you get to section 6, you can start creating new ROCs and figuring out what you want to do in the next quarter. VTO pulls up your traction page of your VTO. You can still click over to Vision if you do want to see that area. A lot of times you guys are just reviewing that 1-year plan and the rocks area, so you have that really easily accessible. And then once you move on to EOS tools, this is usually captured with your EOS implementer, where each quarter you're going through one of these tools in the toolbox and just checking things off as you get things completed. Then within rocks, you come to your long-term issues list mainly because this is that full list of all of the rocks that you didn't get done last quarter. You probably have listed out potential rocks, any big issues that you guys want to talk about during the day. So you're really looking at this and deciding, what do I want to move to that rocks page? And then all of these work just like, you're creating to-dos during a level 10. Here you can just create a rock and turn that long-term issue into a rock. So you have that option right here. Let's go ahead and make this mine and then save it. Then a lot of times you create all of your rocks and move them over, and then you can come to this rocks tab here to actually start going through and making them smart and maybe adding some details so that you guys are ready. So you've got that time frame, and once you guys are done with the rock setting within IDS, it just takes you back to that long-term issues list so you can go through this and chat about any of those issues that are still on here. With next steps and conclude, very similar to a level 10 meeting, recap your to-dos, send cascading messages. If there's anything not on here that you want to add, of course, use the create button to add any of those things. And then once you get to conclude, you're going through that final session recap with those couple things that you guys will share, and then rating the meeting as well. And it works the same exact way, where you get the recap email afterwards. You can even see the rocks you guys created, issues you solved. So it has all of that context within there. And if I suspend this, again, working the same way, where you can open up all of your past meetings and see the details in there as well. Annual, not surprisingly, also works that way. The main difference here is you have a 2-day session. So when you start a meeting, we're going to start it in that day 1 agenda. So very similar, where we're going through just some of those prescribed EOS recommendations within here. And then we're reviewing our last year, reviewing our last quarter. And so it's pulling up the relevant information from the VTO or the rocks page from there. And then when we get into team health, depending on how long you guys have been running on EOS, it'll let you guys just kind of determine whatever. This is just a placeholder for whatever you guys typically go through or will be going through on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And same thing with org checkup, just giving you an opportunity to pull up those organizational checkup documents that you guys work on. After that, we do have the SWOT built into here, so you can create this for the first time or add to what you've done in past years or already have set up in the account. And then you can move on to a VTO review, where you have your full VTO page with the vision traction, and you can still go back and access SWOT as needed. When you guys finish up the day 1 of the annual session, so you've gone through looking at your 3-year and move on to conclude, you don't rate the meeting at the end of this. You actually finish up your day 1 session, and then it lets you start the second day. So if I click start day 2, it'll open up with that day 2 agenda, either the EOS default or from whatever you guys have edited that agenda to be. Let's let that load up here. And then you'll just walk through it like normal. So go through that initial check-in phase and make sure that you guys are all clear on what you guys covered yesterday. And so that's typically done, within here, since you guys talked about your issues list and your 3-year picture in day 1. And then you can move on to the bulk of the meeting, which is your 1-year plan, setting up your rocks, tackling key issues. So very reminiscent of some of those things that you guys would do in the quarterly are all lined up within here as well. Then once you get to next steps, conclude, again, very similar, recap to-dos, cascading messages, and conclude now has our ratings aspect in here, where you can go through and rate the meeting. With all of these meetings, if you guys run into a situation where you're talking about your issues list and there's an issue about the VTO, the accountability chart, something that you want to pull up from your 90 account, it is all available in this view tool option. So even when you're discussing one of these issues and you're on the issues list, click that button and you can pull up any of your other tools that are within 90 really easily and have full edit access or anything that you need to from within here. And it's nice because you're still in that section of the meeting, you still got the timer running. So really helps out as far as like your issue solving and keeping everything in one place. Another option too is, let's say I wanted to give myself a little bit more room on here, I can always hide the left nav. So that's what that hamburger button does, hides the screen for me, and then I can easily pull it back up. I will jump out of that. Feel free to post any questions in here. If there are none in the meetings area, I'll go ahead and move on to the VTO and talk about the multi-team setup within there. Having multiple teams on your VTO, as long as they're not a project, so as you can remember, you can make sure that there is no VTO for specific teams, and that's what they'll look like when they are project teams. But if they are not, essentially your leadership team has full edit access over your main VTO. And what I mean by the main company VTO is they have the option to share theirs with all of the teams. This is an all share, so you can't pick and choose specific teams at this time that you want to share it with. And by default, the core values, the core focus, and the 10-year target are automatically shared. So you'll notice these 3 sections, the leadership team can edit. So they really set those up. And then if I go to a departmental team, it's automatically showing here. So it automatically cascades from leadership for those 3. But by default, each team can set up its own 3-year picture, marketing strategy, traction page, SWOT. It's all team specific, except for those first 3 sections. If a leadership team has said, yes, I want to share my VTO with all teams, it doesn't change the fact that each team still has its own options. So it still has the ability to have its own marketing, vision, traction, and SWOT. The main difference is going to be that view leadership team VTO is now an option here, where I'm actually looking at what's been cascaded and set up on the leadership team, and I don't have edit access over that, just view. You will notice with your long-term issues, there is a bit of an exception here. So even though I'm sharing the leadership team VTO, I have to specifically say which issues I want to share. So if I go back to the leadership team, give you a little bit more detail into that. So with your long-term issues, there's way more than just 3 that we were looking at. But the reason is I have to specifically say which ones are public. So by default, when you're creating a long-term issue, you will have this public and private toggle when you're looking at the leadership team. And that's just so if you have sensitive issues around people or strategy or anything like that, they're by default hidden. You can click on that and that makes it public. So when you are sharing your VTO with all the teams, you have that public option there that they can view that issue. And let's see, and same permissions and everything apply to SWOT. So it is shared with all teams. When you have that turned on, it is per team, so each team can have its own. So it really follows the same permissions and instructions that I just shared. And then you, of course, have this archive option. So when you start a quarterly meeting or an annual meeting, a copy of your VTO have 2 from today already because we just ran a quarterly and an annual. So those automatically saved when I started those. You can also just by default save a copy of your VTO anytime. And this just lets you go back to past versions so you can see progress or rocks or anything like that over time. All right, let me go back to my agenda. We really covered team setup and how that affects the individual pages. We covered customizing meeting agendas. So I think what I'll go into next is the feedback area and really talking about quarterly conversations and annual reviews and how companies are setting those up. Feel free to pop in the Q&A with questions. So feedback area here, these 2 tabs inherently are very similar. So you always have the people analyzer as a part of the conversation. You always have it set up where each person can fill out the forms before they connect for the in-person meeting. There's just a couple differences between the two. So let's go through the quarterly conversation first. To create a new one, you essentially just click that. You can give it any title that you want to. A lot of people will name it by the quarter, team, any specific identifiers like that that you'll want to use for searching in the future. And then you decide who is in that meeting. So who's the manager and who is getting reviewed. If I select multiple people from this list, so let's set Brett and Juanita, then essentially we can choose what seats, and it creates a conversation between me and Brett, and then also between me and Juanita. So it's not for all three of us. These are always between two people. This is just an easy way so that if I manage multiple, I can create multiple conversations at one time. So I'll choose what accountability chart seats that I want to review them for. I can select what day I want to have the conversation, which is great because when this is set up, it actually emails each user. And so that way there can be that clear expectation of when these forms are due right on there. And then the two options below that are determining what you want the managees to fill out, what you want those direct reports to fill out in their conversation. Do you want them to evaluate themselves, which is going to be the core values in GWC and their rocks? And do you want them to review you, the manager, on the leadership and management assessment? I'll show you guys specifically what all of those things look like within here. And then the final aspect is setting up what quarter. Do you want it to, what time frame? Even if you select one of these and your dates are a bit off, you can just use it as a starting point and choose the dates ad hoc like that too. Your final option on here is making it formal. Making it formal for a quarterly conversation means it's giving you a couple of the permissions that you get in the annual review. It means when you both fill out the forms, you can have a feedback meeting within here. So a lot of people do turn this on because it's really helpful, especially for remote teams. If you want to see each person's response side by side, if you follow a little bit more of the traditional EOS methodology where you don't need a history of the conversation, you don't want it saved, you don't need to see the responses side by side, then you can leave that off. Once you've made all your decisions, go ahead and save it. I'll actually open up one of these ones that I already have on the list here. So let's say this conversation is between me and Andres. I'm the manager, he's the direct report. We're each gonna see that option to prepare a form. So we log in on our own devices. We can see that edit button, and we're both doing this individually before we connect. So I can fill out how he's doing on our company core values, and these are pulled right from the VTO. It gives you a plus, plus, minus, and minus option for response. And these are all set because this is very EOS specific in terms of what the people analyzer is, what reviewing somebody on the core values is in the world of EOS. So you can go ahead and fill those out, write comments as you need to, and then it pulls in their accountability chart seat. So you can fill out gets it, wants it, and capacity to do it for that. And those two sections, if you're not familiar with the term people analyzer, it's essentially those two things combined, reviewing somebody in your company on the core values and reviewing them on their accountability chart seat. You can add additional comments in here, and the nice thing is it's kind of formatted for each person. So these questions I read as, how I'm answering them about Andres, but when he logs in, if we've given him permission to review himself, then he's going to actually fill these out and review himself on these and see like what changes did I make to accomplish, better accomplish my job. So everything's kind of flip-flopped for whoever's logged in. The final areas of reviewing the direct report are going to be on the rock section. Looks like we don't have any rocks assigned to Andres. If you need to pull in more, you can always adjust the date timeframes there that you set up at the beginning of the conversation, which might be helpful. And then other than that, you can go down to reviewing yourself, the manager aspect of the quarterly combo, which is just a couple of yes/no responses on leadership and management assessment. So you have the details within there and then can add additional comments as well. At the end of each of these, you do have an attachments option. This is great if you guys do anything that's company specific, job specific, team specific that you want to include within here that's maybe a little bit unique, just so you can have all the information in one place. So once I'm done filling this out, I would actually click submit, and this is going to signify to the other person that I'm done with the form, I'm done filling it out, and I'm ready to have the conversation. So if we click on this, we can see form submitted. He hasn't started it yet, and then this was a formal meeting, so we do have the opportunity to run that side by side. What that looks like, I'll actually show you in the annual review tab. I do have one already created that we can go into, but once each person does click, submit on their form, it opens it up so that this feedback meeting can start. And so I think Michael and I might have a little bit more content. We'll click start feedback meeting here. But yeah, that opens it up. So it's the same layout. It's just now, instead of just my responses, I see me and Michael side by side. We can talk about the differences in our answers. We can write additional comments on here, and just have that open conversation about where those differences may lie. There's our rock review. And again, 55% completion because we're only looking at done rocks. In progress or on track does not equal done. This is where the annual review gets a little bit different than the quarterly conversation we were just looking at. The annual review, you can actually add custom questions within here. I'll show you guys where to do that when we jump out of this meeting. But essentially, you can customize these. These are the 3 default ones that you get with the annual review, but they can be customized either globally for the whole company or for the individual conversation. And they're always just free form responses within here. If I keep going down, I get that leadership and management assessment. So I can see the responses within here. And then at the very bottom, just a signature aspect, nothing fancy, just typing in a name and putting in the date, really just as a signifier that you both agree to everything that was written within here. All right, and let me back out of this one and show you guys where to create those custom custom questions. It's through the settings button right here. So when you click on that, there's those default ones. Just like the meeting, you can reset to the default questions anytime. You can also add new ones or change the existing ones as you need to, delete those either way. And you have the 2 options. One, what do you want to ask on the actual form? And then the sidebar link, if I click on this, you get a little description, but it's just the text that's to the left in the nav bar. So you can keep that one a little bit shorter than the actual question itself. And then if I click on this one, because we've each submitted our forms, now I can actually see all the details just in this description area too, which is nice. So I can always scroll through this. Once you've run the meeting, maybe you have a little bit more comments in here. But when you're done with this meeting, it's completed, which is usually done either in person or just in a Zoom conversation where you can share screen. It works just like a ROC, a to-do, an issue, where you just check it off as done, and then you archive it, and you have all of your archived conversations accessible as well. All right. I think that's all I have to cover on the feedback area. If you do need to make any of these conversations issues or to-dos, you have that more actions button there too. But feel free to post any questions in the Q&A. If there are none, I will go ahead and move on to the process section. I think I see one coming in. Is there an option to print and save the assessments in your HR system? There is. We're actually working on a better way to represent these, but each of these conversations, let's go back to the annual review and print one of these out. Maybe this meeting one. They all have this PDF option, so each conversation has that individually on it. When you press PDF, it should give you essentially whatever you filled out so far. So if it's a quarterly and just your responses are there, you'll just see that. If it's a situation like this where we've both already responded, you'll see it laid out like this. So we're going to update this so that you can see it's only using like the middle portion of the page. So we want to get a little bit more usage out of this PDF option, but it's all here so that if you do want to export and save it in another HR management system, that's definitely an option. Sure thing. All right. And you guys might have seen, but we do have we try and have PDF options on almost all of our pages, even the accountability chart, which is, historically a little bit difficult to print. We have added this PDF print options for it. So if you wanted to print everything on one single page, when I click print, it'll just format to whatever size the chart is. So it'll be high res no matter how many seats you have. It gives you everything in one simple layout here. And that way, even if it's huge, you could still take it to a Kinko's or somewhere that had a larger scale printer if you guys don't have one in your office. Heading into process, this is a look at really that process documentation aspect of the 6 key components. And so your goal here is to really define what are the core processes in my business, which is what we're looking at right now. Within the process manager, you really have 3 different layers within here. And the top one of what we're looking at right now is all the core processes in our business. There's no limit to the number that you can create in here. There's just a plus sign. By default, if you've already got an account, you essentially get 6 that are recommended by EOS. And so each of these tiles you can open up. There's a details button on each one so that you can see things to the right. A lot of people will define like what the core process is looking to achieve, who's involved, end goals, anything like that. And then the 3 main things to look at on a core process are going to be, is it documented? Is it followed by all? And is it effective? And hopefully the details that you put underneath this are going to help you decide yes or no for each of those 3 questions. So details below, what I mean by that is each one of these you can expand into the steps below. And so if we're thinking about this as layer 1 of your process documentation with the core process up here at the top, this is your second layer. What are the steps within the HR process? It's how we hire, it's how we onboard. And so you can define each of these in their own little tile here. Again, being able to add as many details as you need. You have the description area where you can lay out things. You have the details area where maybe you want to create a checklist. Maybe you want to link to like an outside HR system that you guys use and use this. A lot of people use this as like their resource center. So I've got all these different systems running. How am I going to tell people what to do and how to do it? I can just link out and tell them what they're doing in each of their different systems. And so something like hiring, there's probably a lot of detail here. You might not be able to fit it or explain it all in one specific tile. And so that's where we've created sub-steps. So really that 3rd layer within here, core process, step, and then sub-steps. And so within hiring, how do we search? How do we screen? How do we interview? And so within each of these, put those links, put the details where maybe it's a checklist, maybe you attach a video, a form somebody needs to fill out. So all of these tiles have the attachments option, have the option to add as many details as you need to and link to other sites, or even add measurables. And the measurables are pulling from the scorecard. And so what we're going to do in the future is actually build out some reporting based on what processes are performing based on the measurables that are attached to them, hopefully informing that, followed by all an effective aspect through some trackable numbers that you've said are affecting that specific process. So essentially you're assigning a person, an owner to each of these. It doesn't mean like Mark is currently interviewing somebody. It means who am I going to when I have a question about interviewing? So these owners are really defining like who that expert is in whatever this step is. And when I click to assign it, it's actually pulling up all of my accountability chart seats. Because if you think about it, the accountability chart is probably informing who's going to own this item. So something in the HR field, I can pull up an HR seat and I can decide, what, Brett is going to be the right person for that. And then you have some similar function to the accountability chart where you can move things around. If you did want to move something to a new spot, you can open up the view details, more actions button, you can make to-dos, issues, you can clone steps, or completely change where this one lives. So changing the parent process. If I wanted it to be under a CRM instead of HR, for example, I can choose a new section for it to go to. All right, and I think that's everything I have to review on process. Let me head back to my webinar agenda. That's really a lot of what I like to cover. I will jump into some of the user preferences now, setting up notifications, the couple preferences that we do have available for every user now. And then feel free, if you want me to talk to anything else in this, any sort of scorecard setup, accountability chart setup, anything extra, feel free to think about that right now and post it in the Q&A area. So user settings, I mentioned everybody has access to this. We just added it and we'll be adding more here. So if you're looking for other settings aspects, feel free to let me know. Right now you can choose the default team when you log in. So every time you log in, if you want to go to a single one, go ahead and select that. Any international here, you can use different date formatting, which is helpful. And then as far as SMS and notification setup, that happens on this My Account page. So within My Account, this texting area, you may or may not have multiple companies. These are all the different accounts I'm a part of. So you might just have one or two here. But essentially, you can click SMS texting and to begin the setup for this. You put in your phone number. I'll just go ahead and put mine in. Once you add your phone number, you want to send the verification code. And once that's sent, you're going to get a code texted to you. From there, put it in, and that's all you need in order to get set up. So each person does need to do this on their own individually. You can't do it for the rest of your team because there is this verification process. But once you do that, it's going to come up with essentially your instructions. So what you can text in the system is going to be get to-dos. So any sort of get option. So get my to-dos, get my issues, get my rocks. So you get a list of all of your content back to you. You can also add information. So add an issue, add a rock, add a to-do, and it's a back and forth system. So when you say add an issue, it's going to text back what's the title, what team do you want to put it on, do you want a description in there? So you do have this interaction with this texting system. And the other thing it does automatically, which is no action required from you guys, is send you a text message 2 days before to do if it's not marked as done yet. So it just goes basically off of that due date. The system essentially just checks 9:30 every morning to see if there's any new to-dos on your list that are due 2 days from now that aren't done yet. We don't have any other to-do or we don't have any other email reminders or texting reminders for to-dos or any other items. What we're doing right now, so it should actually be set up probably late next week released, but we'll have a daily email that's optional, and it'll include rocks, to-dos, milestones, all of those items that are assigned to you that are more action items. So you can have that optionally emailed to you each morning, so that stays top of list. That'll be probably the next thing that we're actually adding to this user settings area, just that option for the daily email. And then from there, we'll probably build out a little bit more robust of a notification system as far as when items are assigned to you or following things, or a little bit more advanced like that. But so far, just dipping our toe in the water. Any other questions around that? Feel free to let me know. I think that's all I was hoping to cover. So if there are any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. If not, please reach out. You can reach our team just down here in the bottom right through the chat. If you have feature requests, if you have questions, want to get other team members involved and want us to personally train anybody, we're happy to do any of those things. Just need to reach out and our team can get you started on that. You could also email me. My email is christine@90.io. You should be getting a follow-up email from this webinar that will let you know you can reach out anytime. And if there's any other questions, feel free to join another one of these or reach out via email. So appreciate your time. Thanks for joining. I'll give you 10 minutes back in your day. Thanks.